In the depths of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a universal truth that transcends species. The broken seek the broken. When the Galactic Council's most feared experiment meets humanity's most damaged warrior, their bond will either save two worlds or destroy them both. Some friendships are forged in fire. Others are born from the ashes of what was lost. What happens when the galaxy's greatest mistake learns to trust from humanity's most unlikely teacher? The morning rain hammered against the reinforced windows of Marcus Chen's isolated homestead like bullets against armor plating. Each droplet carried the weight of memories he'd rather forget, but the sound no longer made him flinch. 3 years of retirement had dulled some reflexes, though others remained sharp as the combat knife he still kept under his pillow. Marcus sat in his kitchen, nursing black coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, staring at the official Terran Defense Corps letter that had arrived yesterday. The Crimson Seal remained unbroken, but he knew what it contained. They always started the same way. Your service record indicates exceptional capability in xenological integration and combat psychology. What they really meant was that he had a talent for working with the broken, the dangerous, and the discarded. The irony wasn't lost on him. A broken soldier being asked to fix something else the universe had damaged. Thunder rolled across the Montana wilderness, and Marcus finally cracked the seal. As expected, it was another assignment, but this one was different. The usual bureaucratic language gave way to something approaching desperation. Critical xenological subject requires immediate relocation and monitoring. Previous handlers have proven inadequate. Your unique experience with traumatized combatants makes you our only viable option. Attached was a single photograph that made Marcus's breath catch. The creature in the image was unmistakably canine in structure, but scaled up to the size of a small horse. Its fur was a deep silver blue that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, but it was the eyes that stopped Marcus cold. They held an intelligence that was painfully familiar, the look of someone who had seen too much, lost too much, and been forced to keep going anyway. The file was classified beyond his clearance level, but the basic facts were there. Species designation, Kitharin. Origin, unknown rim sector. Current status, hostile to all forms of contact. Handler casualties, 7. Marcus had seen that progression before, though usually in human soldiers. Complete psychological withdrawal following severe trauma. The subject trusted nothing and no one. A distant rumble made Marcus look up from the file. It wasn't thunder. The deep, thrumming sound of military transport engines approached through the storm. Right on time. The Defense Corps had never been known for their subtlety. Marcus stepped onto his covered porch, watching as a massive transport craft descended through the rain clouds. It was one of the heavy-duty models, the kind usually reserved for moving dangerous cargo or high-value prisoners. The craft landed with surprising gentleness in the clearing beside his house, its engines slowly spinning down to silence. 3 figures emerged from the transport, their environmental suits gleaming wet in the dim light. Marcus recognized the lead figure's purposeful stride before she removed her helmet, revealing the sharp features and prematurely gray hair of Colonel Sarah Martinez, his former commanding officer. "Marcus," she called out, her voice carrying the weight of old authority. "We need to talk." "Sarah," he nodded, stepping aside as she climbed onto the porch. "Still making house calls for lost causes?" "Only when the cause is important enough." She gestured toward the transport, "And this one is more important than you know." Through the rain, Marcus could see the other 2 figures working at the transport's rear cargo bay. The distinctive hiss of a containment unit being opened echoed across the clearing. "Tell me you're not about to release something dangerous on my property," Marcus said, though he was already resigned to whatever was coming. "Define dangerous," Sarah replied with a grim smile. "The subject is secured, but barely. We've lost 7 handlers in the past 6 months. Not to violence, mind you. The creature has never physically harmed anyone, but something about prolonged contact with it causes severe psychological breakdown in the handlers. Depression, paranoia, complete withdrawal from human contact. Marcus studied his former colonel's face. With Trust Teddy, Sarah Martinez had been through 3 wars and 2 alien first contact scenarios. If something was making her nervous, it was worth paying attention to. And you think I'm immune to whatever's causing this? I think you're already broken in the right ways to handle it. Sarah said bluntly, your psych profile shows resistance to external emotional manipulation, and your experience with traumatized subjects is unmatched. Plus, you're isolated enough that if things go wrong, we can contain the situation. A loud clang echoed from the transport as something heavy was unloaded. Marcus could see his 2 new house guests struggling with what appeared to be a large containment unit, its surface covered in warning labels in multiple languages. What exactly am I dealing with here, Sarah? The colonel pulled out a tablet and handed it to him. The screen showed a more detailed version of the file he'd received. As Marcus scrolled through it, his expression grew increasingly grim. First contact with the Catharians was 18 months ago, Sarah explained. A deep space patrol encountered a single vessel drifting in neutral space. No response to hails, no signs of life. When they boarded, they found the entire crew dead except for 1 survivor. Our current subject. Marcus continued reading. The Catharian ship had been a transport vessel carrying what appeared to be refugees. Analysis of the scene suggested they'd been attacked by their own kind, though the reasons remained unclear. The lone survivor had been found in what appeared to be a prison cell within their own ship. The Catharians are technically advanced, but their society appears to be rigidly hierarchical. Our xenology teams believe the subject was exiled or outcast for unknown reasons. When its own people found it, they were transporting it somewhere when the ship was attacked. And now it won't interact with anyone? It speaks perfect standard human, which should be impossible given the timeline of first contact, but it refuses to explain how it learned the language. It answers direct questions about basic needs, but nothing else. Food, water, waste elimination, the bare minimum for survival. Anything beyond that, and it simply stares at you with those eyes until you leave. Marcus looked up at the transport, where the containment unit was now being loaded onto a hover platform. You said the handlers broke down. How? First, they reported feeling watched, even when the subject appeared to be sleeping. Then came the dreams, nightmares about being hunted, abandoned, alone in the dark. The handlers began to isolate themselves, refusing contact with family and friends. With Trust Teddy, eventually, they stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped caring about anything at all. Sounds familiar, Marcus muttered, thinking of his own dark months after leaving the service. That's why you're perfect for this assignment. You've already walked through that particular hell and come out the other side. If anyone can build a connection with this creature, it's you. The hover platform approached the porch, and Marcus got his first close look at the containment unit. It was larger than he'd expected, roughly the size of a small room. Through the transparent aluminum viewing panel, he could see movement in the shadows within. One more thing, Sarah said quietly. The subject's name is Kestak. At least that's what it told us when we asked. We've been calling it Kes. You're on a first-name basis with something that's psychologically damaging your people. It insisted on the name. Said if we were going to imprison it, we should at least use its proper designation. Sarah's voice carried a note of something like respect. Marcus, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about xenological relations or scientific study. The Catharian Empire has made it clear that they want their outcast back. They've been very polite about it, but there's an implied threat. If we don't produce Kes soon, they might decide to collect it themselves. Marcus understood. A hostile alien empire deciding to retrieve one of their own from human space could easily be the spark that ignited a larger conflict, and humanity wasn't ready for a war with an unknown but clearly advanced civilization. So I'm not just a handler, Marcus said. I'm a diplomat. You're whatever you need to be to keep that creature stable and cooperative long enough for us to figure out what to do with it. The containment unit was now positioned beside the porch. Through the viewing panel, Marcus could see a large shape moving in the darkness within. As he watched, a pair of luminous blue eyes appeared at the window, staring directly at him with an intensity that made his breath catch. For a moment, neither human nor alien moved. Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a connection to another being's pain that transcended species barriers. Those eyes held depths of loss and abandonment that resonated with his own buried trauma. "Hello, Kess," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely audible through the containment unit speakers. The eyes blinked once, slowly, and then disappeared back into the shadows. Sarah watched this exchange with interest. "That's more reaction than we've gotten from it in months. You might actually be able to do this." Over the next hour, Marcus supervised the installation of the containment unit in his reinforced garage. The structure had been built to house military vehicles, so it could easily accommodate the alien habitat. The unit itself was a marvel of engineering, a completely self-contained environment with atmospheric controls, waste processing, and food delivery systems. The unit is programmed for standard Catharian atmospheric requirements, one of the technicians explained. Slightly higher oxygen content than Earth normal, temperature maintained at 18 degrees Celsius, humidity at 40%. Food is delivered through the automated system every 8 hours. Marcus examined the control panel. What happens if there's a malfunction? Emergency overrides allow for manual environmental control, but we strongly recommend against opening the containment unit. The subject has shown no aggressive tendencies, but we can't be certain of its intentions. After the technicians finished their work and departed, Sarah lingered on the porch. "Marcus, I need to ask you something personal. Are you really ready for this? Your psychological evaluation shows significant improvement, but taking responsibility for an alien being that might be psychically affecting its handlers, it's a lot." Marcus considered the question seriously. The last 3 years had been spent rebuilding himself after a military career that had taken everything from him. He'd lost friends, family, and pieces of his own humanity to various conflicts across human space. The isolation had been necessary for healing, but it had also become a crutch. "Maybe it's time I stopped running from broken things," he said finally. "Including myself." Sarah nodded and handed him a communication device. "Direct line to my office. If anything goes wrong, if you feel the subject is affecting you adversely, call immediately. We'll extract you both." After she left, Marcus stood alone in his garage, staring at the containment unit. Inside, he knew, was a being as damaged and isolated as himself. The thought should have been terrifying, but instead, he felt something he'd almost forgotten: purpose. As night fell, Marcus prepared a simple dinner and ate it at the small table he'd set up in the garage. He wanted Kess to see him, to become accustomed to human presence and routine. Through the viewing panel, he occasionally caught glimpses of movement, but the alien remained in the shadows. "I know you can hear me," Marcus said, speaking to the containment unit as he finished his meal. "I know you understand. With trust, Teddy. I'm Marcus. I'm going to be staying here with you for a while." No response. "I read your file. I know what happened to your handlers. I know they started breaking down after a few weeks with you." "I want you to know that I'm already broken. Have been for years. So whatever you're doing to them, whatever you're projecting or sharing or however it works, it might not have the same effect on me. Still nothing." Marcus stood and approached the viewing panel. The blue eyes appeared again, meeting his gaze directly. "I've lost everyone I ever cared about too," he said quietly. "I know what it feels like to be the last one left. To be the one everyone else considers broken beyond repair." The eyes blinked, and for just a moment, Marcus thought he saw something flicker across the alien features in the shadows. Recognition, maybe, or hope. "We're going to figure this out together," Marcus continued. "I don't know how, and I don't know what comes next. But you don't have to be alone anymore, and neither do I." As if in response, a low sound emerged from the containment unit's speakers. Not quite a growl, not quite a whine, something that spoke of loneliness and guarded hope in equal measure. Marcus settled into the chair beside the containment unit and pulled out a book. "I'll be right here," he said, "for as long as it takes." Thunder rolled across the Montana sky as man and alien began their strange vigil together. In the depths of space, the Kytherian Empire waited for the return of their outcast. But in a reinforced garage in the human wilderness, two broken souls had found each other across the vast darkness of space and species. The real journey was just beginning. The first week passed in careful routine. Marcus woke each morning at dawn, prepared his coffee, and settled into the chair beside Kess's containment unit with whatever book he'd chosen for the day. He spoke occasionally, comments about the weather, observations about the story he was reading, questions he didn't expect to be answered. The alien remained in the shadows, but Marcus could feel those blue eyes watching him constantly. On the 8th day, everything changed. Marcus was reading aloud from an old collection of war poetry when a voice interrupted him. The words came through the containment unit speakers, clear and precise, with an accent that somehow managed to sound both alien and oddly familiar. "Why do you read about war when you have lived it?" The book slipped from Marcus's hands, hitting the concrete floor with a sharp crack. He looked up to find Kess had moved closer to the viewing panel. Though still partially concealed in shadow, the alien's form was even more imposing up close. Easily 7 feet tall, with lean muscle visible beneath the dark fur. But it was the intelligence in those blue eyes that truly commanded attention. "You spoke," Marcus said, feeling foolish the moment the words left his mouth. "I have always spoken. You have simply chosen to listen today." Kess's voice carried an odd resonance, as if multiple tones were layered within each word. "You read of battles and death and loss. Why torture yourself with reminders? Maybe because forgetting would be worse. These poems were written by people who understood what I went through. Reading them makes me feel less alone." "Alone." Kess repeated the word as if testing its flavor. "Yes, you understand that concept well. So do you, apparently." For a long moment, neither spoke. Marcus could hear the subtle hum of the containment unit's life support systems, the distant sound of wind through the trees outside. Finally, Kess moved fully into the light. The alien was magnificent and terrible to behold. The silver-blue fur covered a frame that was unmistakably predatory, with powerful haunches and shoulders built for running or fighting. The face was elongated like a wolf's, but the skull was broader, clearly designed to house a large brain. Scars crisscrossed the visible portions of Kess's body, some old and faded, others relatively fresh. But it was the restraints that made Marcus's breath catch. Heavy metal cuffs encircled Kess's neck, front legs and hind legs, connected by chains that limited movement to the basic necessities of survival. These weren't human-made. The craftsmanship was clearly alien. "Your people did that to you," Marcus observed, trying to keep his voice neutral. "My former people." The correction was sharp. "I am no longer Kytherian in their eyes. The chains are a reminder of that fact." "What did you do?" Kess's ears flattened against his skull. "I chose compassion over duty. In Kytherian society, this is considered a form of madness." Marcus leaned forward in his chair. "Tell me, why should I share my failures with a human? Your species is known for its violence and disregard for proper hierarchy. You would not understand the complexities of Kytherian honor. Try me." Kess studied Marcus's face for a long moment. "You were military. A leader of some kind. I can smell the authority on you even now when you try to hide from it. K. Colonel. Retired. I led a battalion of combat engineers through some very ugly situations." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I was honored for completing missions. I was discharged for questioning orders that got my people killed." Something shifted in Kess's expression. "You chose your soldiers over your commanders." Yes, perhaps you would understand. Alien moved to the back of the containment unit and returned with what appeared to be a small metallic cube. When Kess touched one face of the cube, it projected a holographic image into the air between them. Marcus found himself looking at a vast starship, its hull gleaming silver against the backdrop of space. The vessel was beautiful in an alien way, all flowing curves and organic lines that suggested it had been grown rather than built. This was the transport vessel Kethmoran, Kess explained. I was its security commander, responsible for the safety of 300 civilian refugees fleeing the destruction of their homeworld. Marcus saw corridors filled with aliens of various species. Not all Catharian, there were beings he didn't recognize, some roughly humanoid, others completely alien in form. The refugees were from 12 different worlds that had been conquered by the Catharian Empire. Under normal circumstances, they would have been processed for assimilation into our society, or eliminated if deemed incompatible. But these were special cases, individuals who possessed knowledge or skills deemed valuable enough to spare their lives. Slaves, Marcus said flatly. Functionaries. The distinction is important in Catharian law, though I suspect it would be meaningless to a human. Kess's tone carried a note of self-disgust. I was ordered to ensure they arrived at the processing facility in good condition. Nothing more, nothing less. The hologram changed again, showing what appeared to be the ship's detention levels. Families huddled together in cramped cells, aliens of all shapes and sizes confined in spaces barely large enough for their bodies. The voyage was to take 40 standard days. By day 10, 17 refugees had died from inadequate life support in the detention areas. The ship's medical officer reported that without immediate improvements to their conditions, at least half would not survive the journey. Marcus watched Kess's face as the alien relived the memory. The pain there was unmistakable and achingly familiar. I requested permission to modify the detention protocols. Denied. I submitted a formal report on the deteriorating conditions. Ignored. On day 15, when a family of 6 died overnight because their environmental controls failed, I made my choice. You freed them. I redistribute them throughout the ship's unused quarters. I ordered medical care for the sick and proper nutrition for all. I told my security teams that we were responsible for the lives in our care, not just their eventual delivery. The hologram now showed the same corridors, but transformed. Families moved freely through common areas. Alien children played together while their parents worked alongside Catharian crew members. It looked almost peaceful. For 10 days, it worked. The refugees recovered their health. Some even began assisting with ship operations, sharing knowledge that improved our efficiency. I filed reports claiming everything was proceeding normally, that the refugees were being maintained in acceptable condition for delivery, but someone found out. My second-in-command reported my actions to the fleet command. A hunter-killer squadron was dispatched to intercept us. Their orders were to eliminate any evidence of my contamination by alien influences and return me to face justice for dereliction of duty. The hologram shifted one final time, showing the aftermath. Bodies floating in corridors that had been vented to space. Families torn apart by explosive decompression. The organic beauty of the ship's interior transformed into a tomb. They offered me a choice, Kess continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Return to custody willingly, and some of the refugees might be allowed to live as originally planned. And every being on the ship would be eliminated as a potential source of further contamination. So, you surrendered. I was placed in the containment cell where your people found me. I was forced to watch as the survivors were systematically executed. 300 beings who had trusted me to protect them, killed because I had shown them kindness. Marcus sat in silence, processing the weight of Kess's confession. He understood now why the previous handlers had broken down after prolonged exposure to the alien. The grief and guilt radiating from Kess was overwhelming, a psychic pressure that would crush anyone unprepared for it. The chains were added as a reminder of my failure, Kess continued. In Catharian society, they mark me as honor lost, one who has betrayed the trust placed in them. I am to wear them until I die, a warning to others of the consequences of placing individual conscience above collective duty. That's not failure, Marcus said quietly. That's heroism. Kess's eyes widened in surprise. Heroism? I led 300 innocent beings to their deaths because I was too weak to follow orders. You gave them 10 days of dignity and hope. You showed them that not all Catharians were monsters. And you paid a price that most people wouldn't be willing to bear. Marcus stood and approached the viewing panel. In human culture, we have a saying, "Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends." You didn't lay down your life, but you sacrificed everything else. Your career, your people, your freedom. And for what? They all died anyway. For the principle that some things are more important than following orders. For the idea that compassion isn't weakness, it's strength. Marcus placed his palm against the transparent aluminum. I was discharged from the military for refusing to order an orbital bombardment of a civilian population center. Acceptable losses were using human shields. That acceptable losses were inevitable. I told them to find another way or find another commander. Kess moved closer to the barrier, studying Marcus's face intently. You chose conscience over duty as well, and I've spent the last 3 years wondering if I was a coward or a hero. Meeting you, I think I have my answer. What answer? Sometimes being broken in the right places makes you more human than being whole ever could. For the first time since arriving at the homestead, Kess's expression shifted towards something that might have been hope. Your previous handlers could not understand this. They felt my guilt and despair, and thought it was a disease, something to be cured or contained. They did not realize it was a choice, the choice to feel responsible for others, even when you can't save them all. Yes. Kess lowered himself to the floor of the containment unit, bringing his massive head closer to Marcus's eye level. There is something else you should know, Marcus Chen. Something the Catharian Empire has not told your government. I'm listening. I am not the only one. There are others like me scattered throughout Catharian space. Officers, civilians, even some nobles who have chosen conscience over conformity. We are called the HFY in our language, the lost ones. Most are executed when discovered, but some are kept alive as examples. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. How many? Hundreds, perhaps thousands. We maintain contact when possible, sharing information about safe routes for refugees, warning each other of hunter-killer squadrons, sometimes even organizing rescue operations. You're part of a resistance movement. We are broken Catharians trying to save what we can from our people's cruelty. But yes, in human terms, you could call us a resistance. Kess's eyes gleamed with something Marcus hadn't seen before. Determination. The Empire wants me back not just as an example, but because they know I have information about the HFY network. They believe torture will extract what they need to eliminate the others. Will it? Torture is ineffective on my species. But they have other methods. Psychic manipulation, chemical alterations to brain chemistry, surgical removal of memory centers. Eventually, they would succeed. Marcus stepped back from the viewing panel, his mind racing. This changed everything. Kess wasn't just a traumatized refugee. He was a key figure in an underground movement that could potentially reshape an entire galactic empire. Why are you telling me this? Because I believe your species might be the key to something we have never had, hope for actual change rather than simple survival. Kess stood again, his full height impressive even within the containment unit. Humans have a reputation throughout this galaxy. You are known as a young, aggressive species that refuses to accept that some things cannot be changed. That's one way to put it. The Catharian Empire has existed for over 2,000 years, In all that time, no significant internal reform has ever occurred. Dissidents are eliminated, alternative viewpoints are suppressed, and the rigid hierarchy is maintained through fear and tradition. But humans overthrow their own governments when they become dissatisfied with them. You wage war against impossible odds and sometimes win. You adapt and change and refuse to accept defeat. Marcus could see where this was leading. You want humanity to help your resistance movement. I want to offer humanity something they have never possessed. Detailed intelligence about the largest military power in this sector of the galaxy, fleet movements, weapon capabilities, political structures. In exchange, I would ask for safe passage for the HFY refugees who could reach human space. That's a hell of a proposal to make to a retired colonel living in the middle of nowhere. But you are not just a retired colonel, are you, Marcus Chen? You are a man who chose conscience over orders. A human who understands that sometimes the right choice is also the hardest choice. And now you are the only person in human space who knows what I have just told you. Marcus walked to the windows of the garage, looking out at the Montana wilderness that had been his refuge for 3 years. In the distance, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. He thought about his conversation with Sarah Martinez, about the implied threats from the Kytherian Empire, about the 7 handlers who had broken down trying to care for a single traumatized alien. "If I help you," he said without turning around, "I'll be betraying my own government's attempt at diplomacy with your empire. Yes, I'll be risking humanity's security by potentially provoking a war we're not prepared for. Yes, and I'll be trusting the word of an alien who admits to being part of a resistance movement against his own people." Marcus turned back to face the containment unit. Kess was watching him with those luminous blue eyes, waiting for a decision that could change the course of galactic history. "On the other hand," Marcus continued, "if I don't help you, you'll eventually be returned to your empire, where they'll torture information out of you and use it to eliminate every other member of your resistance. Hundreds or thousands of beings who chose compassion over cruelty will die." That is accurate. And humanity will be left dealing with a galactic empire that has just demonstrated its willingness to hunt down and execute anyone who shows mercy to other species. That doesn't bode well for future diplomatic relations. Marcus returned to his chair and sat down heavily. 3 years of isolation, of carefully rebuilt peace, were about to be thrown away for the sake of an alien he'd known for 8 days. But as he looked into Kess's eyes, he saw something that made the choice inevitable. He saw himself reflected there, another broken soldier who had sacrificed everything for the principle that some orders should not be followed. "What do you need from me?" he asked. For the first time since their initial meeting, Kess smiled. It was a strange expression on the alien features, but unmistakably genuine. "First, I need you to help me get out of these chains." The chains were a masterpiece of alien engineering, Marcus discovered. Each link was forged from a metal that seemed to absorb light, making them appear as dark wounds against Kess's silver-blue fur. The locks were even more sophisticated, biometric scanners that responded only to specific Kytherian genetic markers, backed up by quantum encryption that would take human computers centuries to crack. "Your people don't take chances," Marcus observed, running his fingers along the containment unit's control panel. "The chains are not merely physical restraints," Kess explained from within the unit. "They contain neural inhibitors that suppress certain brain functions, aggression, territorial behavior, pack bonding instincts. They were designed to make me docile, compliant. Are they working?" Kess's laugh was bitter. "They were calibrated for a normal Kytherian mind. But the trauma of watching 300 innocents die changed my neural patterns. The inhibitors are less effective than intended." Marcus paused in his examination of the controls. "You're saying you could break free if you wanted to? The physical chains, yes. The containment unit, no. And even if I could escape, where would I go? I am alone on an alien world, hunted by my own people, trapped in a body that most humans would consider monstrous. You're not trapped alone anymore, Marcus. Kess moved closer to the viewing panel, his massive frame imposing even behind the barrier. What I am asking of you, it will destroy your life as you know it. Your government will consider you a traitor. Your people will see you as a collaborator with alien interests. Are you truly prepared for that? Marcus thought about the question seriously. 3 years ago, the answer would have been no. He'd been broken, hollowed out by loss and guilt, interested only in finding a quiet place to fade away from the universe's notice. But something had changed during these past days of conversation with Kess. The alien's pain had awakened something in Marcus that he'd thought was dead forever, the desire to make a difference, to stand for something greater than himself. My life as I know it isn't worth preserving, he said finally. I've been hiding out here pretending that isolation was healing, when it was really just another form of slow suicide. Maybe it's time I remembered why I became a soldier in the first place. And why was that? To protect people who couldn't protect themselves, to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. Marcus met Kess's gaze through the transparent barrier. Your people, the ones you call the HFY, they're innocent. They chose compassion over cruelty, and now they're being hunted for it. If humanity is truly the young, stubborn species you described, then maybe we're exactly what your resistance needs. Kess was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of something Marcus hadn't heard before: genuine hope. There is a way to remove the chains, but it requires accessing the containment unit's internal systems. Your people installed additional security protocols when they placed me here. Marcus pulled up the unit's diagnostic interface on the control panel. The screen showed multiple layers of encryption, biometric locks, and automated defense systems. Breaking through them would take time and skill he wasn't sure he possessed. I might have a solution for that, he said, reaching for the secure communication device Sarah Martinez had given him. But it's going to require trusting someone else with our secret. Who? The only person I know who's even more stubborn than I am. Marcus activated the device and waited for the connection to establish. After several seconds, Sarah's voice came through clearly. Marcus, is everything all right? It's been 8 days since your last report. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. What's your assessment of the Catharian Empire's long-term intentions toward humanity? That's an odd question. Is there something about your situation I should know? Answer the question first. Off the record, they scare the hell out of me. Everything we've learned about their society suggests they view other species as either resources to be exploited or obstacles to be eliminated. The only reason they've been polite so far is that they're still evaluating our military capabilities. And if they decide we're not a threat, then we become another species to be conquered and processed for assimilation. The diplomatic corps is hoping we can establish some kind of mutual non-aggression treaty. But personally, I think we're just buying time until they're ready to make their move. Marcus exchanged a look with Kess, who nodded slowly. The alien's assessment of human-Catharian relations matched what he told Marcus about his people's nature. Sarah, I'm about to tell you something that's going to sound insane. I need you to listen to everything before you respond. Marcus, you're starting to worry me. Over the next 20 minutes, Marcus laid out everything Kess had told him. The alien's true identity, the massacre of the refugees, the existence of the HFY resistance movement, and the intelligence Kess was offering to share with humanity. When he finished, the communication device was silent for so long that Marcus began to wonder if the connection had been lost. Sarah? I'm here. I'm just trying to process what you've told me. Another pause. Marcus, if what you're saying is true, then we're not just dealing with a traumatized refugee. We're holding a key figure in an alien resistance movement that could potentially destabilize the largest military power in this sector. That's about the size of it. And you're asking me to help you release him from a containment unit that 3 different departments of the Defense Corps spent weeks securing. I'm asking you to make the same choice I made, the same choice Kess made. Put conscience ahead of protocol and do what's right instead of what's easy. What you're describing isn't conscience, Marcus. It's treason. Marcus looked at Kess, who was listening intently to the conversation. The alien's expression was carefully neutral, but Marcus could see the tension in his posture. Is it treason to prevent genocide, Sarah? Because that's what we're talking about. The Kytherian Empire is systematically eliminating anyone in their society who shows compassion toward other species. If we send Kess back to them, we're not just condemning him to death, we're helping them destroy the only force within their empire that might eventually lead to peaceful coexistence. You don't know that the resistance can succeed. I know that it can't succeed if we eliminate their leadership for them. The device crackled with static for several seconds. When Sarah's voice returned, it was quieter, more thoughtful. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that humanity makes a choice about what kind of species we want to be. Are we going to be the ones who hand over refugees to their oppressors because it's diplomatically convenient? Or are we going to be the stubborn, idealistic species that Kess described? The ones who fight impossible odds because it's the right thing to do? And if this goes wrong, if the Kytherian Empire decides to retaliate against human space, Marcus looked out the window at the storm clouds gathering over the Montana landscape. Then we'll deal with it the way humans always have. We'll adapt, we'll fight, and we'll refuse to surrender our principles just because the alternative is difficult. Another long silence. Finally, Sarah spoke again, and Marcus could hear the weight of decision in her voice. What do you need from me? Access codes for the containment unit's internal systems, and transportation off-world for two beings who are about to become fugitives from both the Kytherian Empire and the Terran Defense Corps. Marcus, you realize that if I do this, I'll be ending my own career, possibly my freedom. I realize that, and I'm sorry to ask it of you. Don't be sorry. Be right. Sarah's voice carried a note of grim determination. I've spent my entire career following orders and watching other people pay the price. Maybe it's time I remembered why I joined the service in the first place. 20 minutes later, Marcus's communication device chimed with an incoming data packet. The access codes appeared on his screen, along with a brief message. Transport will arrive at your location in 6 hours. Destroy this device after you've freed your friend. Good luck. And may we both be remembered as patriots rather than traitors. Marcus showed the codes to Kess, who studied them carefully through the viewing panel. Your colonel is taking an enormous risk, the alien observed. She's doing what leaders are supposed to do, making the hard choices so others don't have to. Marcus began entering the access codes into the containment unit's control system. Each authorization level opened new options, revealing the sophisticated array of systems that kept Kess secured. Environmental controls, structural integrity fields, automated defense protocols. It was like unlocking a high-security prison, one layer at a time. Once these chains are off, Marcus said as he worked, what's our next step? I have memorized the locations of several safe houses and supply caches throughout this sector, but more importantly, we need to begin gathering intelligence about Kytherian fleet movements and strategic installations. You want to turn this into a military operation? I want to turn this into hope, Marcus. For the first time in 2,000 years, the Kytherian Empire faces the possibility of real change. But change requires information, resources, and allies willing to stand against overwhelming odds. The final authorization code accepted, and Marcus heard the containment unit's security systems cycling down. Magnetic locks disengaged with sharp clicks, and the environmental barrier that had separated him from Kess for the past 8 days began to retract. As the barrier rose, Marcus caught his first breath of Kess's natural scent, something like pine forests and ozone, with an underlying sharpness that spoke of intelligence and barely contained energy. The alien stepped forward carefully, testing the limits of his restraints. "The chains!" Kess said simply. Marcus approached the towering alien, feeling a momentary surge of primitive fear as he realized just how large and powerful Kess truly was. The Kytherian stood nearly 8 feet tall, with muscle mass that suggested he could easily overpower multiple humans in hand-to-hand combat. but it was the restraints that made Marcus's breath catch. Up close, the neural inhibitor chains were even more horrific than he'd imagined. They didn't just restrict movement, they bit into Kess's flesh, where the metal contacted his skin, leaving raw wounds that never seemed to heal properly. Dried blood and damaged tissue spoke of months of constant, low-level torture. "This is barbaric," Marcus said, reaching for the lock on the neck restraint. "It is intended to be. In Catharian culture, exile is not simply banishment. It is the complete erasure of an individual's worth and dignity." Kess held still as Marcus worked with the alien locking mechanism. "The chains ensure that even if I were to somehow return to Catharian space, I would be immediately recognizable as honor lost and subject to summary execution." The lock on the neck restraint finally yielded to Marcus's improvised electronic pick, and the heavy collar fell away with a metallic clang. Kess immediately raised his head higher, stretching muscles that had been held in an uncomfortable position for months. "Better? You can not imagine." Kess's voice already sounded different, stronger, more confident. The neural inhibitors were designed to suppress not just aggressive behaviors, but also higher cognitive functions: leadership, strategic thinking, emotional bonds. "I have not felt truly myself since they were installed." Marcus moved on to the restraints binding Kess's front legs, working carefully with tools that seemed pitifully inadequate for the task. "How do you feel now?" "Like I am remembering who I used to be." Kess flexed his newly freed front legs and Marcus could see the raw wounds left by the restraints, "but also like I am becoming someone new. The Marcus Chen who freed me is not the same human who accepted this assignment 8 days ago." No, he's not. The restraints on Kess's hind legs proved more challenging, but eventually surrendered to Marcus's persistent efforts. The question is, who are we becoming? As the last of the chains fell away, Kess stretched his full length for the first time in months. The alien's true majesty was revealed as he moved freely around the garage, his natural grace and power no longer constrained by Caitharian cruelty. "We are becoming what the galaxy needs," Kess said, turning to face Marcus, "a human who chooses conscience over orders, and a Caitharian who chooses hope over despair. Together we are something neither of our species has produced before. And what's that? The possibility of change." Marcus gathered the chains and restraints, carrying them to his workbench. With methodical precision, he began disassembling them with power tools, reducing the symbols of Kess's imprisonment to scrap metal. "What are you doing?" Kess asked. "Making sure these can never be used to hurt anyone again." Marcus looked up from his work, meeting the alien's luminous gaze. "In human culture, we have a tradition. When someone breaks free from oppression, they destroy the instruments of their bondage. It's symbolic, but symbols matter." Kess watched as the neural inhibitor collars were reduced to unrecognizable fragments of metal and circuitry. When Marcus finished, the alien approached the workbench and placed one massive paw on the scattered debris. In Caitharian culture, we believe that an individual's true strength is revealed not in victory, but in how they respond to defeat. You have shown me that humans understand this principle better than my own people. Maybe that's why we're supposed to work together. Outside, the storm that had been building all day finally broke. Lightning illuminated the garage through the windows, and thunder rolled across the Montana wilderness. But inside, 2 unlikely allies stood ready to challenge an empire and change the course of galactic history. The transport ship Sarah had promised would arrive soon. When it did, Marcus Chen would cease to be a retired colonel living in peaceful isolation. He would become something far more dangerous, a human with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. And beside him would stand Kestek, no longer the broken survivor of Caitharian cruelty, but a leader ready to reclaim his people's lost honor. The real war was about to begin. The transport ship that arrived in the Montana storm was unlike anything Marcus had seen in his military career. Sleek and predatory, it seemed to flow through the air rather than fly, its hull absorbing electromagnetic signatures in ways that would make it nearly invisible to most sensor arrays. This wasn't a Defense Corps vessel. It was something far more sophisticated. "Where did Sarah get access to a ship like that?" Marcus asked as they watched it settle silently into the clearing beside his house. "She didn't," Kess replied, his enhanced senses picking up details Marcus couldn't perceive. "That vessel is of Kytherian design, but the modifications are unusual. Someone has been very busy while we talked." A figure emerged from the ship, moving with the fluid grace that marked experienced zero-gravity combat training. As she approached the garage, Marcus recognized the confident stride, but not the equipment she carried. Sarah Martinez wore armor he'd never seen before, form-fitting material that seemed to shift color with the lighting, integrated electronics that suggested capabilities far beyond standard military issue. "Sarah!" Marcus called out as she entered the garage. "Hello, Marcus, and you must be Kestak." She removed her helmet, revealing the same sharp features Marcus remembered, but her eyes held a hardness that hadn't been there during their last conversation. "We have a lot to discuss and very little time to do it." "That armor? From friends you haven't met yet?" Sarah's gaze shifted to Kess, who had moved closer to assess this unexpected development. "Friends who have been waiting a very long time for someone with your particular knowledge and motivation to become available." Kess's ears pricked forward, a sign of intense interest. "You speak of the Kess-High network." Sarah activated a holographic projector built into her armor's forearm. The image that appeared showed a three-dimensional map of local galactic space, with dozens of star systems highlighted in different colors. "What would you say if I told you that the human government has been in contact with Kytherian dissidents for over 6 months?" Marcus stared at the display, his mind racing. "I'd say that changes everything about this situation. The official diplomatic contact with the Kytherian Empire has been exactly what it appeared: formal, cautious, focused on establishing basic trade and non-aggression protocols. But there have been other channels. Unofficial communications from Kytherian individuals who claimed to represent a significant opposition movement within their society." Kess studied the holographic display intently. "Show me the communication protocols they used." Sarah manipulated the controls, bringing up a series of encoded transmissions. The format was immediately familiar to Kess, whose expression shifted from suspicion to amazement. "These are authentic Kess-High codes," he confirmed. "But this level of organization, this degree of coordination, I had no idea the network had grown so large. According to our contacts, there are active resistance cells in over 40 Kytherian-controlled systems. They've been passing intelligence, coordinating refugee evacuations, and even conducting sabotage operations against Empire military installations." Marcus sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed by the implications. "So when you sent me here to babysit one traumatized alien, I was hoping that alien would choose to trust a human with information we desperately needed." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Marcus, I want you to understand something. The decision to release Kess, to commit ourselves to supporting the Kytherian resistance, that wasn't treason. It was the culmination of months of preparation and planning. You've been playing a much larger game than I realized. Humanity has been playing a much larger game. We're not the naive, recently spacefaring species the Kytherian Empire believes us to be. We've been preparing for the possibility of conflict with them since first contact, but we've also been hoping for exactly this kind of opportunity." Kess moved closer to the holographic display, his attention focused on specific systems highlighted in red. "These locations, they're sites of recent Kess-High operations, some of them. Others are refugee gathering points, supply caches, or safe houses. The Resistance has been building infrastructure throughout Kytherian space, but they've been limited by lack of resources and external support." "Which is where humanity comes in," Marcus realized. "Exactly. We can provide things the Kasai desperately need: advanced technology, weapons, intelligence capabilities, and most importantly, a safe haven for refugees who manage to escape Catharian space. Sarah manipulated the display again, zooming in on a particular system near the border between human and Catharian territory. This is where we're going. A space station in neutral territory that has been serving as an unofficial embassy for Kesshai representatives. They've been waiting for someone with Kess's authority and knowledge to arrive. My authority? Kess's voice carried a note of confusion. I am an exile, stripped of all rank and recognition within Catharian society, but not within the Resistance. Your actions aboard the Kethamoran have made you something of a legend among the Kesshai. The security commander who chose to save refugee lives over following orders has become a symbol of what they're fighting for. Marcus watched Kess process this information. The alien's entire posture had changed, shifting from the guarded stance of a survivor to something approaching the bearing of a military leader. How many? Kess asked quietly. How many what? How many Kesshai know what happened on my ship? How many have heard the story? Sarah checked her armor's data display. According to our contacts, your story has been transmitted throughout the Resistance network. It's become a rallying cry for Catharians who are questioning their empire's policies but haven't yet found the courage to act. Then I am no longer just a failed security commander seeking redemption. I am a responsibility. Marcus recognized the shift in Kess's voice, the weight of leadership settling on someone who had tried to walk away from it. He'd felt the same transformation many times during his own military career. The question is, Marcus said, standing and approaching the holographic display, what exactly are we walking into? If this space station has been serving as a Kesshai embassy, it's probably being watched by Empire forces. Undoubtedly, Sarah agreed, but it's also protected by the same neutral territory agreements that allow human and Catharian diplomats to meet safely. The Empire can't move against it directly without violating interstellar law. Since when do empires care about interstellar law when their security is threatened? Since other empires started watching to see how they respond to challenges. Sarah highlighted several other regions on the galactic map. Humanity isn't the only species concerned about Catharian expansion. There are at least 6 other major civilizations that would view a successful resistance movement as a way to limit empire influence without risking direct confrontation. Kess studied the display with growing intensity. You're describing a coalition of species united against Catharian hegemony. I'm describing the possibility of 1. If the resistance can demonstrate that internal change within the empire is actually feasible. Sarah deactivated the holographic display and secured her equipment, but that requires leadership, coordination, and resources that the Kesshai currently lack. It requires Kess, Marcus realized. It requires both of you. Kess brings the knowledge, the connections, and the symbolic value the resistance needs. You bring something equally important, proof that humanity is willing to risk everything to support the cause of freedom within Catharian space. Marcus looked at his home, thinking of the 3 years of carefully constructed peace he was about to abandon. When do we leave? Empire hunter-killer squadrons have been detected moving toward this system. Our intelligence suggests they're not here for diplomatic purposes. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. They're coming to collect Kess. They're coming to clean up a loose end that's become politically inconvenient. Sarah was already moving toward the door. The official story will be that the traumatized refugees suffered a psychological breakdown and had to be sedated for transport back to Catharian space for proper medical care. And the real story. The real story is that Kess disappears into a Catharian detention facility and never emerges. The Resistance loses a key figure, and humanity loses its best chance of establishing meaningful contact with the opposition movement. Kess was already gathering items from around the garage. the holographic cube containing records of the Kethmoran massacre, the fragments of his former restraints, and a few personal items Marcus had provided during their week together. "I am ready," the alien announced. Marcus took a final look around the space that had become his sanctuary. The chair where he'd spent countless hours reading to Kess, the workbench where he'd destroyed the chains of oppression, the windows through which he'd watched storms pass over the Montana wilderness. All of it was about to become memory. "No regrets?" Kess asked, seeming to sense Marcus's internal struggle. "Only one. I regret that it took me 3 years to remember who I was supposed to be." They boarded Sarah's ship just as the first flashes of light appeared in the night sky, the telltale signatures of ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel. The Kytherian hunter-killers had arrived. The ship's interior was as impressive as its exterior, clearly designed for long-range reconnaissance and covert operations. The crew consisted of only 3 individuals besides Sarah, but their equipment and efficiency suggested capabilities far beyond what their numbers would indicate. "Marcus, Kess, I'd like you to meet the team that's been working on the Kytherian situation for the past 6 months. Sarah gestured toward the ship's command crew. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, xenolinguist and cultural analyst. Commander Jake Torres, intelligence specialist. And Lieutenant Sophia Reyes, our pilot and technical systems expert. Chen?" Marcus looked more closely at the woman operating the communications console. The resemblance was subtle but unmistakable. "My daughter, Dr. Grizov?" Chen said without looking up from her displays. "I requested assignment to this mission when I learned you were involved." Marcus felt another piece of his old life shift into new alignment. Elizabeth had been estranged from him since his discharge from the military, unable to understand why he'd chosen principle over career advancement. Her presence here suggested changes and perspectives he hadn't expected. "Dr. Chen has been our primary liaison with the HFY network," Sarah explained as the ship lifted off, its stealth systems immediately engaging to mask their departure. Her work in xenolinguistics has been crucial in establishing trust with the resistance contacts. "And what have you learned about them?" Kess asked, settling into a specially modified chair designed to accommodate his size. Elizabeth finally looked up from her console, meeting Kess's gaze directly. "I've learned that the resistance is far more sophisticated than anyone in the human government initially believed. They have their own intelligence network, their own supply chains, even their own diplomatic protocols for dealing with non-Kytherian species. But they lack coordination," Commander Torres added from his position at the tactical display. "Each cell operates independently, which provides security but limits their ability to conduct large-scale operations, which is where Kess comes in," Lieutenant Reyes called from the pilot station. "According to our contacts, the Resistance has been waiting for someone with the authority to unite the various cells under unified leadership." Kess was quiet for several minutes, processing the weight of what was being offered to him. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying the resonance of command decisions being made. "Before I can accept such responsibility, I need to understand the true scope of what we're attempting. Show me everything: intelligence reports, resistance capabilities, Imperial fleet positions, potential targets. If I'm to lead the HFY into open rebellion against the Empire, I need to know the odds we face." Over the next several hours, as their ship traveled toward the neutral territory rendezvous point, Marcus watched Kess transform from a traumatized refugee into something approaching a general. The alien absorbed information with startling speed, asking pointed questions about logistics, communications, and strategic vulnerabilities that demonstrated a military mind of exceptional capability. The Empire's greatest weakness, Kess concluded after reviewing the intelligence package, is the same as its greatest strength. The rigid hierarchy that maintains order also prevents rapid adaptation to changing circumstances. If we can coordinate simultaneous operations across multiple systems, they won't be able to respond effectively until it's too late. "What kind of operations?" Marcus asked. "Refugee extraction, supply depot raids, communications disruption, and most importantly, propaganda distribution. The Empire maintains control through information suppression. If we can show ordinary Catharians that resistance is possible, that there are alternatives to blind obedience, support for the government will begin to erode. Doctor! Chen looked up from her analysis of HFY communication protocols. That's remarkably similar to the strategies human resistance movements have used throughout history. Perhaps because the fundamental nature of oppression is the same regardless of species, Kess replied. Those in power maintain their position by convincing those without power that change is impossible. Proving them wrong is the first step toward actual change. As they approached the coordinates for the neutral space station, Marcus found himself thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. A week ago, he'd been a broken soldier hiding from responsibility in the Montana wilderness. Now he was part of a conspiracy that could reshape the balance of power in their entire sector of the galaxy. Contact from the station, Lieutenant Reyes announced. They're requesting identification and purpose of visit. Tell them, Kess said, his voice carrying new authority, that Kestak of the Kethmoran has arrived to speak with those who remember the fallen. The response came immediately. A series of coded transmissions that had Kess's ears pricked forward in surprise. What is it? Sarah asked. They're not just expecting us, Kess replied, his voice filled with something approaching awe. They've been preparing for this moment for months. The entire Kesai Leadership Council is gathering to meet with us. Marcus looked out at the approaching station, its lights gleaming against the star field like a beacon of hope in the darkness. Whatever happened next, there would be no going back. The die had been cast, and the fate of two civilizations hung in the balance. But for the first time in years, Marcus felt truly alive. The weight of purpose had returned to his shoulders, and beside him stood an alien ally whose courage had already changed the course of history. The real revolution was about to begin. The neutral space station was a marvel of diplomatic engineering, a massive structure that had been built by contributions from a dozen different species to serve as neutral ground for interstellar negotiations. As their ship docked, Marcus could see vessels from across the galaxy, some designs he recognized, others completely alien to human understanding. But it was the cluster of modified Catharian ships in the restricted docking bay that caught his attention. Unlike the organic flowing lines of Imperial vessels, these had been altered with angular modifications and additional weapon systems that spoke of a military force operating outside official channels. Impressive, Kess observed, studying the Resistance fleet through the docking port viewing windows. They've managed to acquire and modify more vessels than I would have thought possible. How? Marcus asked. Defections. Mostly. When Caitharian officers choose to join the Resistance, they often bring their ships with them. Kess's expression grew thoughtful, but this represents years of careful recruitment and planning. The Kess-High network is far more organized than I realized. Sarah led them through the station's corridors toward the diplomatic wing. The architecture was deliberately neutral, avoiding designs that might favor any particular species. But Marcus noticed that the gravity and atmospheric controls had been adjusted to Caitharian norms for their visit. The Resistance leadership requested standard Caitharian environmental conditions, Dr. Chen explained. Apparently, many of them have been living in modified human or other alien atmospheres for so long that they wanted this meeting to feel like coming home. They were met at the entrance to the diplomatic suite by a figure that made Marcus catch his breath. The Caitharian waiting for them was clearly elderly, his silver-blue fur marked with streaks of white that spoke of advanced age. But it was the scars that commanded attention, ritual markings that covered his face and neck in patterns Marcus didn't recognize. Kestak of the Kethmoran, the elder said, his voice carrying the weight of authority and years of command. I am Veltar, formerly Admiral of the 3rd Imperial Fleet, now servant of the Kasai cause. We have waited long for this day. Kess straightened to his full height, but his posture showed respect rather than challenge. Admiral Veltar, your reputation precedes you even into exile, as does yours, young commander. Your actions aboard the transport have become legend among our people. 300 innocents given dignity in their final days. One officer willing to sacrifice everything for principle. Such stories give hope to those who thought honor was dead in the Empire. Marcus watched this exchange with fascination. Even in exile and rebellion, Cytherian's social protocols remained complex and formal. But beneath the ceremony, he could sense genuine emotion, recognition between warriors who had made similar sacrifices. "Come," Veltar continued, gesturing toward the inner chamber. "There are others who wish to meet you both." The diplomatic suite had been transformed into something resembling a Cytherian war room. Holographic displays showed star maps, fleet positions, and intelligence reports, but it was the beings gathered around the central table that truly impressed Marcus. 12 Cytherians stood as they entered, each bearing the distinctive markings of high rank within their society. Marcus recognized the bearing of military officers, government officials, even what appeared to be religious leaders. This wasn't just a resistance cell, it was a shadow government in exile. The HFY Council of Remnants, Veltar announced formally. Representatives of every major faction within our people who have chosen conscience over conformity. One by one, the council members introduced themselves. Admiral Kethron of the Fifth Fleet, who had refused orders to bombard a civilian population. Magistrate Yelsaf, who had been exiled for opposing new laws that eliminated due process for political dissidents. High Priest Mordain, cast out for teaching that compassion was a virtue rather than a weakness. Each story was different, but the pattern was the same. Individuals of high rank and responsibility who had reached a point where they could no longer serve a system that demanded cruelty in the name of order. "And this," Veltar said, indicating Marcus, "is Colonel Marcus Chen, the human who chose to free our brother rather than deliver him to his executioners." "Actually," Sarah interjected, "Marcus was discharged from active service for refusing to follow orders that would have resulted in civilian casualties. His situation is remarkably similar to many of yours." Marcus felt the weight of 12 alien gazes studying him with new interest. "I'm honored to meet you all," he said, "but I'm not here as a representative of humanity. I'm here as someone who believes that the choice between following orders and doing what's right should never be a difficult one." Admiral Kethron's ears pricked forward. "Yet for both our species it often is. Why do you think that is?" "Because systems of power tend to reward obedience over ethic. It's easier to follow orders than to think about consequences." Marcus looked around the table at faces marked by the cost of their principles. "But the price of blind obedience is ultimately higher than the price of moral courage." "Wisdom," High Priest Mordain observed, "and one that our empire has forgotten, to its great detriment." "Now, to the matter at hand. Kestak, we have spent months preparing for your arrival, but we need your knowledge and authority to move forward. The resistance cells are ready to act, but they require coordination and leadership." Kes studied the display intently. "Show me the current operational capabilities." What followed was the most comprehensive military briefing Marcus had ever witnessed. The HFY had built a network that spanned hundreds of worlds, with assets ranging from spy networks within Imperial command structures to hidden supply depots in remote systems. They had ships, weapons, intelligence capabilities, and most importantly, popular support among significant portions of the Cytherian civilian population. "But we lack unified command," Admiral Kethron admitted. "Each cell operates independently to maintain security, but this prevents us from conducting large-scale operations that could truly challenge Imperial authority." "And we lack external support," Magistrate Yelsoth added. "The Empire's military advantages are overwhelming. Without allies among other species, we can harass but not defeat them." "Which brings us to the proposal we wish to present," Veltar said, his gaze shifting between Kes and the human team. "A formal alliance between the HFY resistance and humanity, with the goal of establishing a new Cytherian government based on principles of justice and compassion rather than domination and fear." "What exactly are you proposing?" "Joint operations. Human intelligence and technological support in exchange for detailed information about Imperial military capabilities and strategic vulnerabilities. With Trust Teddy, sanctuary for Kesai refugees in human space, and safe passage for human representatives in liberated Catharian territories. You're talking about formally involving humanity in a civil war within the Catharian Empire. We're talking about preventing that civil war from becoming a galactic conflict, Veltar corrected. If the resistance fails, the Empire will emerge stronger and more aggressive than ever. They will view their successful suppression of internal dissent as proof that their methods are correct, and they will apply those methods to their dealings with other species, including humanity, Kess added quietly. A victorious empire that has eliminated all internal opposition will have no reason to treat external neighbors with restraint. Dr. Chen had been analyzing data on her portable display throughout the conversation. The intelligence you're offering, it's comprehensive enough to shift the balance of power in this entire sector. That is the intention, Admiral Catherine confirmed. But intelligence, without the will to act upon it, is meaningless. We need partners who understand that sometimes the choice is not between war and peace, but between a just war and an unjust surrender. Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. A week ago, his biggest concern had been whether to fix the leak in his garage roof before winter. Now he was sitting in a room with the leadership of an alien rebellion, discussing strategies that could reshape galactic civilization. "There's something I need to know," he said, addressing the entire council. "If this alliance succeeds, if you manage to overthrow the current imperial government, what comes next? What kind of society are you planning to build?" High Priest Mordain answered first. "One where compassion is considered a virtue rather than a mental illness, where the needs of individuals matter as much as the needs of the state, a society with checks and balances on power," Magistrate Yelsoth added, "where leaders can be held accountable for their actions and decisions, a civilization that views other species as potential allies rather than resources to be exploited." Veltar concluded. "The Catharian Empire has existed for 2,000 years by convincing our people that strength requires cruelty. We intend to prove that true strength comes from justice." Kess had been quiet throughout this exchange, but now he stood and moved to the holographic display. With practiced movements, he began highlighting specific systems and fleet positions. "If we're going to do this," he said, his voice carrying the authority of command, "we need to start with symbolic victories that demonstrate the resistance is more than just isolated cells of malcontents. I propose Operation Redemption, simultaneous strikes against 3 Imperial detention facilities where political prisoners are being held." The council members exchanged glances, recognizing the shift in Kess's demeanor from survivor to leader. "The facilities are heavily defended," Admiral Catherine observed, "but they're also symbols of Imperial oppression. Successful rescue operations would have tremendous propaganda value, and the freed prisoners would provide additional resources for our cause." Marcus studied the tactical display. "You'd need perfect coordination and superior intelligence to pull off something like that." "We have the intelligence," Kess replied, "and with human technological support, we can achieve the coordination." Sarah activated her own communication device, establishing a secure connection to her superiors. "I need to discuss this with Command, but speaking personally, I think humanity would be interested in supporting operations focused on freeing political prisoners." Over the next several hours, they developed the framework for an alliance that would have seemed impossible just days before. Human intelligence and technological capabilities combined with Catharian resistance networks and operational knowledge. Joint command structures that respected the sovereignty of both species while maximizing their combined effectiveness. But it was the personal moment between Marcus and Kess that truly sealed the agreement. As the formal negotiations continued around them, the two stood together at the station's observation deck, looking out at the stars. "Are you certain about this path?" Kess asked. "Once we begin joint operations, there will be no returning to your quiet retirement." "I stopped believing in quiet retirement the moment I met you," Marcus replied. "Sometimes broken people need to find something worth fighting for to remember who they used to be." And sometimes exiled beings need to find allies who understand that honor isn't defined by obedience to unjust laws. The news that Kestak had survived and was actively working to rebuild the resistance had spread through the HFY networks with remarkable speed. Cells that had been dormant for months were reactivating. New recruits were stepping forward. Even some Imperial officers were beginning to question orders they'd previously followed without hesitation.
The revolution has already begun, Veltar announced to the assembled council. Our communication networks are reporting increased activity in 17 systems.
The mere knowledge that unified leadership exists has given our people hope they haven't felt in years. 3 months later, Marcus stood on the bridge of a joint human-Catharian command ship, watching as the liberation of detention facility Gamma 7 unfolded on the tactical displays. The operation was proceeding flawlessly. Resistance forces had disabled the facility's communications and defense systems, while human special operations teams provided technical support and extraction capabilities. But it was the aftermath that truly mattered. As transport ships carrying freed political prisoners departed the facility, they broadcast messages throughout the local communication networks. Stories of Imperial cruelty, testimonies of resistance courage, and most importantly, proof that change was possible. Facility liberated, all prisoners extracted, minimal casualties, came the report from the operation commander. We're detecting widespread communication activity throughout the system. The local population is responding to the liberation broadcasts. Kes, who now wore the insignia of Supreme Commander of the HFY Liberation Forces, studied the reports with satisfaction. 3 facilities, over 2,000 political prisoners freed, and the entire Catharian communication network buzzing with news that the Empire is not invulnerable. More importantly, Dr. Chen added from her intelligence station, "We're detecting defections from Imperial forces in 12 systems. The sight of their own people choosing freedom over fear is having the exact psychological impact we hoped for." Marcus watched the tactical displays show Catharian resistance forces withdrawing successfully from all 3 operations. In the months since the alliance had been formed, they'd conducted 17 joint operations, each one building momentum for the larger goal of Imperial transformation. "What's our next target?" he asked. "The Imperial Communication Array at Velvani," Kes replied without hesitation. "If we can capture it intact, we can broadcast resistance messages directly to the Imperial capital. Every Catharian in the Empire will hear the truth about their government's crimes." "That's not a raid," Sarah observed. "That's an act of war." "No," Kes corrected, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "That's an act of liberation. The Empire declared war on its own people the day they decided that compassion was a crime punishable by death." As their ships prepared for the next phase of operations, Marcus reflected on the transformation he'd witnessed. The broken alien who had been delivered to his Montana homestead had become the leader of the most significant resistance movement in galactic history. The traumatized human veteran who had been hiding from responsibility had found purpose in fighting for justice across species boundaries. But more than that, they'd proven something that neither species had believed possible, that beings from different worlds could unite around shared principles and create something greater than either could achieve alone. The Catharian Empire still controlled hundreds of worlds and commanded fleets that dwarfed the combined forces of the Resistance. But for the first time in 2,000 years, they faced opponents who refused to accept that "this is how things are" was an adequate justification for cruelty. And in conference rooms and military installations throughout Imperial space, officers and officials were beginning to ask questions they'd never dared voice before. What if there was a better way? The revolution that had begun with one broken human choosing to trust one exiled alien was spreading across the galaxy, carried by the simple idea that some principles were worth any sacrifice. In the end, that might be enough to change everything. The stars stretched endlessly in all directions, full of possibilities that neither empire nor exile had imagined. And in the space between worlds, two species that had found each other across the vast darkness continued their work of proving that hope was stronger than fear, that conscience was more powerful than convenience, and that sometimes the broken pieces of different worlds could be forged into something unbreakable. The galaxy would never be the same. A battle-hardened human vet receives an outcast alien wolf, and it speaks perfectly human, HFY.